In the very heart of the Vatican, a series of events is unfolding, signaling significant changes for the entire Church. These are not grand pronouncements or sensational revelations, but rather a quiet yet resolute transformation, touching the very foundations of the ecclesiastical structure. Prepare to learn about changes that have already begun and are gaining momentum, promising a new identity for the Church's servants worldwide. In recent months, the Vatican has witnessed extraordinary activity, indicative of profound shifts. This transformation is occurring without fanfare or media attention, yet with a clarity and precision that speaks louder than any words. It is precisely this approach that is causing discontent among those accustomed to the established order. For some, these changes represent a long-awaited breath of fresh air, a return to the true values and mission of the Church. For others, they pose a threat to centuries-old traditions and power. But one thing remains undeniable: the changes have begun, and they are unstoppable. It all started with a barely noticeable item published in the official Vatican Bulletin. It reported minor administrative adjustments within several key ministries. However, hidden behind these dry lines was a true sensation. 3 experienced officials, pillars of Vatican bureaucracy, known for their media connections and diplomatic talent, were quietly reassigned to other positions. No scandals, no demotions, simply a transfer. Their places were filled by new faces, virtually unknown outside their own parishes. These were pastors from remote dioceses, men and women distinguished by their humility, dedication, and, notably, a distinct lack of social media presence. This was not a purge, but a complete system reboot. The entire Vatican structure is being reoriented, prioritizing those who know how to serve, not just present an image. Soon after, another decisive step followed, a new papal directive mandating that all newly appointed bishops reside not in luxurious diocesan palaces, but among their flock. Traditional residences were not abolished, but the meaning was clear: pastors must be close to their people. A personal letter to the new bishops emphasized, "Do not govern from the heights of power, serve among the people." How can the faithful hear Christ if they cannot knock on your door? This is about a priest living in the community, knowing by name the children attending catechism, and visiting the sick without unnecessary ceremony. This is what pastors should be, not princes, but brothers. In an act many considered symbolic, a decision was made that was almost unthinkable for traditionalists: to permanently abandon the iconic red papal shoes, a symbol of papal authority and martyrdom for centuries. In their place, simple brown shoes were chosen, handmade by a cobbler from a small Italian village in Italy. To those outside the Church, this might seem insignificant, but for the initiated, it was a profound statement. The red shoes were not just footwear. They were a symbol of continuity, tradition, and infallible papal authority. Yet, they were announced without a word, prioritizing practicality over ostentatious luxury. No more televised masses from the private papal chapel, where predecessors had permitted and even encouraged the presence of cameras. The doors were closed. No photographers, no broadcasts. Only the sound of the liturgy, quietly shared with a small circle of attendees. Critics spoke of secrecy, but the response was simple. The Eucharist is not a spectacle, it is a sacrament. The media expressed displeasure, but priests from remote corners of the world finally saw a pope who shared their humble daily life, who, like them, celebrated the sacred without excessive pomp. What lies ahead, and what will these changes bring? For decades, the Vatican's financial activities had been shrouded in suspicion and become the source of major scandals. In response, the Pope released his personal financial statements in full and demanded that all high-ranking Vatican officials follow his example. Salaries, bonuses, travel expenses, all became publicly accessible. Addressing Brazilians who struggled to pay bills and work diligently for every real, he emphasized their right to know how the Church uses resources, which are often the result of their donations. Transparency, he stated, is not a favor, but an act of justice. Within weeks, he authorized an independent lay-led audit of all Vatican departments. The auditors, neither theologians nor clergy, were Catholic economists, forensic accountants, and anti-corruption experts with no ties to the Vatican hierarchy. Despite objections from some prelates, he remained resolute, declaring in a closed meeting, "Truth does not fear the light." One of the boldest moves was the announcement of the inclusion in the next synod of bishops, not only of cardinals and bishops, but also of laity, nuns, and practicing Catholics holding no official positions. He redefined the very idea of consultation, emphasizing that no one holds a monopoly on the Holy Spirit, who acts through all believers. Invitations were sent to missionaries in the Amazon, a young Catholic nurse in Seoul, and a catechist in rural Zambia. All were invited to Rome not as observers, but as full participants. He emphasized that for the first time, the Church was listening not just to itself, but to its people. In a gesture that stirred hearts and raised eyebrows among diplomats, he ordered the conversion of unused Vatican properties, including private parts of the gardens, into temporary shelters for migrant and refugee families. Tents were set up and volunteer doctors were brought in. He was seen walking among the improvised shelters, speaking with families in their native languages and blessing children. When asked by a reporter why refugees were being housed in one of the Church's most sacred places, he declared, "This garden is an Eden only for exiles." He stressed that you cannot preach mercy without practicing it. In an internal memorandum, which quickly became public, he introduced a spiritual practice whereby every Vatican department must observe a day of fasting and prayer once a month, seeing it not as a symbolic gesture, but as a spiritual discipline linked to their work. The message was clear. If you govern the Church, you must first humble yourselves before God. Secretaries fasted alongside cardinals, rosaries replaced lunches, and laughter gave way to silence. He emphasized that a Church that does not pray cannot serve. In an act of unprecedented transparency, he ordered the publication of the Vatican's full financial budget, disclosing every line item, every euro, and every expenditure. In the preface, he wrote that you cannot ask the poor to entrust their souls to the Church if the Church does not entrust them with the truth. In a homily delivered not from the chair of St. Peter, but on a windswept hill in Assisi, he declared that environmental care was no longer merely a social or moral issue, but a sacred obligation, creation being part of God's covenant. He emphasized that you cannot separate faith from caring for our common home. In an act some called the most provocative of his pontificate, he invited a group of Catholics previously alienated from the Church, dissident theologians, former religious, and LGBTQ+ individuals, to a private retreat gathering in the Vatican. This was an invitation not for absolution or renunciation, but to listen. For 3 days, he sat among them, without cameras or press. The meeting was difficult, painful, and sacred. Afterward, he wrote, "We do not heal wounds by ignoring them. We must touch them, even when they bleed." He emphasized that Jesus came not for the righteous, but for sinners. In an era of digital influence, he made an unexpected announcement, mandating that all Vatican staff, including cardinals, deactivate their personal social media accounts. He explained that a pastor's voice should not compete for likes. Instead, a single Vatican platform was created for communication, devoid of individual comments or online discussions from the higher clergy. As a result, the noise ceased, and the Church spoke less, but with greater weight, marking a historic departure from centuries of strict ecclesiastical governance. Pope Leo XIV initiated a synod open not only to bishops, but also to laity, nuns, and even representatives of other Christian denominations. Each participant, be it a cardinal from Rome, a nun from Manila, or a Protestant theologian from Geneva, was allotted equal speaking time. It was emphasized that the Holy Spirit speaks not only within the walls of the Vatican, but in every corner of the world, in the hearts and souls striving for Christ. At the very heart of Vatican tradition lies a symbol often overlooked, the handcrafted red papal shoes, signifying royalty and the Pope's readiness to shed blood for the faith. However, on the day of his inauguration, Pope Leo XIV eschewed this footwear, choosing instead to keep his old black shoes, brought from his previous diocese. These shoes, bearing scuffs, cracks and patches, had traversed dusty village roads, refugee camps, waded through sewage to serve the sick, and silently knelt before the Eucharist. Addressing the people of Brazil, Pope Leo XIV stressed that his transformations, encompassing financial transparency, ecological responsibility, support for the marginalized, open dialogue, and the renunciation of social media and regal symbols, were achieved not through grand pronouncements, but through consistent action, quietly and with resolve. These changes, he stated, have affected everyone, regardless of their opinion of him. Pope Leo XIV emphasized that this is not a political maneuver, but a profound conviction that is now spreading beyond the Vatican. The Church is in a process of transformation, gradual and painful, yet inevitable. This process began with a man who listens more than he speaks and who remains true to his convictions. Speaking to Brazilians, known for their simplicity, sincerity, and selfless service, Pope Leo XIV noted that these changes are not political strategies, but a return to the origins, to the purity of the gospel, and a re-evaluation of true values. Some actions may cause surprise or challenge long-standing traditions, but, as the Pope observed, did not Jesus live in the same way, simply, accessibly, openly, serving all? This quiet revolution continues in the actions of everyone who chooses service over dominance, when a community opens its doors to those in need, when simplicity triumphs over ostentatious luxury, and love triumphs over protocol. Pope Leo XIV expressed confidence that the Universal Church has much to learn from the Brazilian people. In concluding his address, Pope Leo XIV expressed hope for God's blessing and the intercession of Our Lady of Aparecida, urging all to continue this path of renewal and love together. He ended his address with words of paternal love and an apostolic blessing.